Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. This is episode 306, our draft review show. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the Arizona Cards site from the NFL Wire, the USA Today NFL Wire, and my co-host is Seth Cox, as always, from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site, and one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. Seth, so what do y'all do on the podcast, you and Justin, now that the draft is done?
Yeah, we'll run through the whole NFL, look at all the divisions over the next month, and then starting in June, we're going to do a whole lot of prep for next year and start kind of getting our top 10 at each position group, talk about colleges and preview names to know and start getting kind of that database built for the 2022 draft, which is probably going to be one of the most talented and deep that we'll see in a while, just because of the to 2021 where they get a lot of players got took an extra year and decided to come back and work another year. So, you know, even seniors got to opt back in if they wanted to.
It's fantastic. So if you haven't started yet, it's definitely still worth your time to check out the original Draft Breakdown podcast, because they'll be they're wrapping up the draft coverage for this year. You can be much more prepared for the upcoming draft class with the new college football season coming, which hopefully is somewhat normal. I know I am optimistic for the fact I might be able to go watch my Sun Devils play this year, which would be kind of fantastic to do. But we're not here to talk about Seth's podcast, so you should probably listen to it. But this edition of the show is all about the Arizona Cardinals draft, because the draft is over, so it's not a preview anymore. We get to wrap up and review the Cardinals draft, where they made 7 selections after they made a trade up. We're going to break down each one of their picks. Well, we'll start with the first round, which was, it wasn't I wouldn't say it was a home run of a draft, but it was probably, it feels like kind of like a double. If you're going baseball, it's not a home run, but it's probably a couple of doubles. We're going to go through their picks in the first round. Linebacker, Zaven Collins out of Tulsa. The second round, Rondale Moore, receiver out of Purdue. They don't have a pick in the third or the fourth round, but do trade from the fifth into the fourth to pick up Florida corner Marco Wilson. And then they have a couple of picks in the sixth and the seventh round. They pick up Victor Dimukeje, outside linebacker, edge rusher, was a defensive end there from Duke. They pick up another cornerback in UCF's Tay Gowan. And then in the seventh round, they go with safety James Wiggins out of Cincinnati. And then an offensive lineman. They go with Michael Minette out of Penn State, center. And that wraps up the draft class. So we're going to go through each one of those picks, what we like, react to them, what role we expect them to play, and perhaps what they should have done. And get started with the Zaven Collins pick. Now, the first round, going into this, there were, for me, and I think for you as well, 4 players on my absolute wish list. And that would have been, Jamar Chase I never even considered. So either Jalen Waddle or Devontae Smith at receiver, or either J.C. Horn or Patrick Surtain at cornerback. and hoping that perhaps, maybe, somehow, one of those players could fall to number 16. If they got any one of those 4 players, it's a home run. It's an A-plus first round for me. They're all gone in the first 10 picks, which you and I more or less expected to happen. With that not happening, once we saw Devontae Smith come off the board at number 10, what were your hopes that the Cardinals would do by pick 16?
I didn't have a real care. I preferred Najee Harris just because I prefer him as a player. Nothing against Zaven Collins. I think I said it 2 months ago before the Cardinals even drafted him. I think he's going to be a star in the NFL. That being said, I love the way Najee plays. I thought his skill set, the way he plays the running back position would have been, a slam dunk for the Arizona Cardinals. But at the same time, I understand why they wouldn't select a running back in the first round. But they've also selected 5 off-ball linebackers in the top 45 now. So I'm not sure that they actually care about value of picks.
That's the thing. And I was of the same thing. So once those 4 guys were off the board, I wanted the Cardinals to trade back. I didn't have a problem with Zaven Collins. In fact, he was my second favorite. I like you, Najee Harris. If they had to do anything at number 16, I would have rather taken Harris. I thought he's a slam dunk of a pick. You have, especially on a team where offense is supposed to be your biggest strength, and you have 2 running backs who are under contract for 1 year, and you have a potential star running back to keep that running game, elite. And I thought he was a slam dunk of a pick. That said, what I didn't want to happen, actually, I wanted them to trade back. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I wanted them to trade out of that pick, get something in the 3rd round, get something in the 4th round. I just wanted them to trade out of the pick. That was it was the only thing I wanted the Cardinals to do, because for me it didn't matter who the pick was. It wasn't going to be an A pick. And that, when you grade, I know it seems ridiculous to grade draft picks at this point, but it's always a balance between talent, value, and fit and need on a team. The top 4 were the only ways that I was going to think there was an A first round. If you stayed at 16 and take anyone else, the best you're going to do is a B. And Zaven Collins for me is an A pick if you pick him up at 20 or later and picked up an extra pick. I like Zaven Collins, a player. I think he's going to be fun. In fact, it's really easy for me to fall in love with these guys. As you get to hear their stories and things like that, it's just in the fan of me, I want to root for all of them. But I would have rather Collins and a pick. That would have been an A pick. So I would have taken Najee, but we all kind of knew that Collins was such a Cardinals pick, such a Steve Keim pick forever. I will say one thing though. The one thing that we were worried about, is I wrote several times, is the one thing about, there were actually 2 worries about the Collins pick. Well, one is drafting another off the ball linebacker with a first round pick, or drafting a player for the 4th time in the last 7 years and then changing his position. When we heard about his weight gain to 270, there was some worry and some whispers and some that we had heard that the Cardinals really liked his potential at the edge. So it turns out that necessarily wasn't true, because Keim was very clear about one thing. He is a Mike linebacker. He is not positionless. He has a position. He is not Isaiah Simmons. He is a guy who's been playing the position, and they kind of expect him. So in that sense, very pleased that they have a plan for him, and it isn't to change positions. I'm not saying that he won't do some things like blitz. He won't rush off the edge every once in a while, but his home is going to be Mike Backer, and that's the fun part. Now, what do you see him doing this year? Because it became very clear from comments, both like when Cliff was on the phone with Zaven, he said, "There's no red shirt and get ready." Cliff's admitted that, Steve Keim basically told everyone that their first 2 draft picks better play and better play often. And so that was kind of the mindset. They didn't want any projects. Yet you've got a defensive captain in Jordan Hicks playing that position. Now we know because of the restructure of his contract, he's in his last year. There's no really way that he's going to come back after this season. So that Collins is going to transition to that position. How do you see them deploying Collins in this coming season, especially a year where they're loading up and they've been adding veteran, so that they can kind of make a push for the postseason and the Super Bowl? It seems like Collins is the anti of that movement.
Yeah, but one of the things that Collins brings is a coverage ability that actually kind of mimics what Jordan Hicks used to be able to do, especially when he was in Philadelphia, which made him a target for the Cardinals, before all the lower leg injuries. So I think that's kind of his immediate role, is that he'll compete for that Mike spot and some reps, but mostly he'll probably get some third down run as the guy coming in for coverages, because he is so versatile as a big man, and he moves so well that he's going to offer a really nice skill set against especially NFC West opponents. When you look at the way that the Rams and 49ers specifically run screen passes, and the Cardinals never stop screen passes.
They are the worst. They kind of done all right on tight end, but running back like catching the ball for running backs is the worst.
And so I think that's his immediate impact. I was talking to some people the other day, and it was funny. We had the conversation, what game of the season do you expect Collins to become the starter over Hicks? And this isn't a shot at Hicks, but it was one of the things that you and I talked about 2 years ago when they signed him, that when you sign a guy that's had multiple lower leg injuries, that was in fact a athletic linebacker, and now he's not athletic because of those.
2019, he looked really good, but looked like he was near the end. Last year, he looked.
There was just
slow.
no juice left.
He looks slow.
There's just no juice left in the legs, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's honestly part of the NFL. I mean, a lot of these guys, they get their second contract and they can't finish it, and that only gets them into what? I mean, their late 20s, maybe early 30s. So, I think we'll see Collins probably start. I said probably by game 8. People I talked to are saying game 6. I'm going to say game 8. He's starting, and the Cardinals are running out an incredibly young and talented inside linebacking core, and hopefully we don't have to discuss the position for a while.
That if there's one thing about this that is super exciting, just the fact you pair, if they hit near their ceiling, Isaiah Simmons and Zaven Collins, the way they are built, they are giant. Like, it was surprising. Now, Simmons is leaner, but he is a large man. He is a very large man. Like, it rivals Chandler Jones in terms of his size. And Zaven Collins is every bit as tall, only he's bigger. And I think we talked about last week, one of the best descriptions is it looks like on the college film, it looks like he's twice as big as everyone else out there. So you're going to have two giant linebackers in the middle of the field who move extremely well. In terms of the dynamic, we have the potential. Now, it's different because they're bigger, but you watch how the Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright pairing has done for Seattle for so many years. This is the type of thing that you could see for the Cardinals. You have two long, athletic linebackers who can go cover sideline to sideline and get up the field and rush the passer and kind of do kind of everything. It's almost as if they had kind of if you had, remember the 2012 season when they had Darrell Washington and Carlos Dansby together, that dynamic part. Only it's Carlos Dansby and it's a prime young Carlos Dansby paired with a young Darrell Washington with no problems off the field, and pairing them for the next 5 to 10 years. That's going to be amazing.
Yeah, and that's obviously the hope and the expectation, especially when you're talking about. I mean, I've said it a lot. I know people think I'm harping on it, but if you're drafting two linebackers, off-ball linebackers in the top, 50, they better be 7 to 10 year type of players. Like, you better get second contracts off of them, and they have not done that at all at this point. So they need to figure out, and hope that these are the two that do it. And if they do, whether it's, Vance Joseph's defense or if it's another, they'll have two guys that literally never come off the field.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
In today's NFL, that's irreplaceable.
All right, with that, let us move on to our next pick. So coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web, the second round, one of the two offensive players they select, speedy receiver Rondale Moore. That's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. And so what we're going to talk about now is obviously their second round pick. So if there's one complaint for the first two rounds, I'm sure it would be that the Cardinals did not get a cornerback. And it looked so close. Asante Samuel kept falling and falling and falling and falling. And it seemed like, now I honestly, based on what I was seeing from Twitter and other guys that in my network that cover the team, I always felt that Samuel was never going to get to the Cardinals, but there was that chance. But then, he gets selected two slots before the Cardinals at number 47 to the Chargers. But as we were watching the draft unfold, the linemen, the players that were coming off the board in the second round were going, holy cow, they're getting drafted, and you felt really good because Asante Samuel, Terrace Marshall, and Rondale Moore were all they looked like they were going to be available. And Samuel didn't end up being there, but you end up with Terrace Marshall, LSU, and then Rondale Moore. And that pick, I think we both would agree that if we were making the pick for the Cardinals, we would have gone the other way with Marshall. That said, considering what the Cardinals expected from their second round pick and considering the type of offense, we all knew it was going to be, if it was a choice between the two, it was going to be Rondale Moore. Would you agree?
Yeah, and there were some obvious concerns with Marshall's health. He fell further down. I think he was one of the last picks of the second round, if I remember correctly. So it's not quite that easy. It's one of those things that we kind of discussed, that this draft was really difficult just due to the fact that teams didn't get a chance to meet and run their normal, pre-draft process with these guys. Remember last year, they still got the medical checks. They still got the combine last year. So the only thing they did not get was those in-person team meetings. And so this year it was just all gone. And so if you had a question on Terrace Marshall's, I guess it was his ankle. I'm not even sure exactly what it was, but his ankle. And then you have Rondell Moore, who you're like, okay, we know they're grade one hamstring issues. I guess you go with the one you know more about. Now, obviously, they're different players in terms of where they play. Moore's a true slot dynamo. He works from there consistently, um, and that's where he's played at Purdue, and he's produced at a high level. Marshall was going to be behind AJ Green 100. I mean, there's zero question that he was going to be behind AJ Green this year. Now, the question is, will they miss on not having that guy coming into next year? That's a question to ask. But the reality is, they have faith that AJ Green can still contribute and be somewhat AJ Green. So that's going to be why you go with Moore in that situation, because I think it's kind of telling and says a lot about what their expectations for Christian Kirk and Andy Isabella are for the future.
Absolutely. And this, I think this is kind of the same type of thing as we went over a couple of years ago, is we saw the Cardinals taking Andy Isabella over DK Metcalf in the same type of scenario, because they felt Andy was going to, and this is also something you can see with Cliff Kingsbury's offense. Where does he find value in his receivers? And so while you got your Z now in AJ Green, they didn't take DK Metcalf, in part because obviously there were concerns because of his movement skills and whatnot, and the drops that he'd had. And the Cardinals, frankly, were looking for someone to play in the slot, and they felt Andy would be a dynamic slot receiver, even though he never really did it at UMass. And so in Cliff's offense, having that shifty, speedy, a guy that can just run away from people to play in the slot, you can tell that is a priority he has, as they've now done, in the second round for the second time in 3 years. They've gone with a guy with basically the same type of physical profile, right? Little, thick, and speedy. The difference is Moore, and here's the thing, is that both Isabella's huge year was in 2018. What happened to be, they were two of the most productive receivers in all of college football. The difference was Rondell Moore did it in a better conference and did it against everyone, and did it as a freshman. I think he already is what I think Cliff Kingsbury hoped Andy Isabella could be. And when you can get the guy that you already know, and whether you comp him to a Steve Smith or a Tyreek Hill, I think that's Tyreek Hill really hard because he's so special, but he can do the same type of thing. And so if he gets on the play, like if they find snaps for him, I think he's already going to be more advanced than Isabella was, or maybe even Isabella is, because Isabella has had to transition to the slot. He's made strides, but Moore is a better playmaker, has better hands, and catches the ball better plainly.
Yeah, and he's a more advanced player already coming out than what we've seen from Isabella. So, it'll be interesting to see Moore get on the field and contribute. I think there are a few players with his ability as a guy with the ball in his hands. And what I say by that is when you watch him, I talked about it on Twitter the other day. He's not quite as just pure speed as maybe Jalen Waddle in this draft, or the comparison of Tyreek Hill. He maybe doesn't have that mid 4.2 speed, but he's a different problem because he is a low 4.3 guy already, and two, he is incredibly physical.
He runs angry.
He runs, and it's obviously not an apt comparison because just from a size and skill perspective, but he reminds me of Anquan Boldin when he runs. Like, he tries to run through your face, and he's not trying to avoid contact or make plays. And one of the craziest plays, everybody knows that Ohio State play, where he catches the ball on kind of a flare and then runs through a tackle, breaks it, and then gets into the open field and takes it to the house. But there's a play against Wisconsin that is incredible, where he catches a quick slant and runs over their inside linebacker, Zach Bond, who I believe ended up being a 3rd-round pick. And he runs over him at the 5-yard line and scores a touchdown. And that play, more than any, kind of shows you who Rondale Moore is as a player, is that he's not looking to get through or, avoid contact. He's trying as much as he can to run over you and through you. And that's just a different way to play as a 4.3 guy.
And here's the thing. If you've ever met any ultra athletic short guys, they play Russell Westbrook in the NBA. He plays with that sort of chip on his shoulder. Like, he's trying to make you pay when he's like I think he's Steve Smith, Anquan Boldin, Tyreek Hill, because he got a little bit of edge to him, but that's the way he plays. Andy, I don't get that vibe from. He's an aw shucks guy. He works hard. He's super quiet. And I know he's incredibly hardworking, but he doesn't play with the chip that Moore does. Because now, granted, Moore's even shorter than Andy Isabella. And there's the joke going around that the Cardinals are trying to build a midget team between you got Kyler Murray and Chase Edmonds and Christian Kirk and Andy Isabella and Rondale Moore. They're all little, but he plays with a chip on his shoulder when he's out there. So it's going to be super fun to watch him play, the type of role he's going to have. He's going to return punts. He's going to return kicks. I think his role initially will be the Andy Isabella role. So Isabella's going to have to really step up if he's going to find playing time this year. He'll be the gadget play guy. He'll be the 4th receiver. And, Christian Kirk better stay healthy this year, because otherwise Moore will probably slide into that role. And I liked how I think Mel Kiper who wrote it and said that he might become Kyler's favorite target.
Well, and the thing is that he's a guy that likes to compete. And what I mean by that is, like we talked about it, he tries to run through you. He tries to run at you. He doesn't try to avoid the contact, and that's going to endear him to a lot of people, and especially his quarterback, because that is one thing that you and I have talked about on this show before, is that Isabella and Kirk at times don't play as physical as you would like. And we talked about it, even on those jet sweeps where they're getting stood up short when they should be lowering their shoulder, running through guys. Moore's going to do that. He's going to try to run through these guys. And, whether he's successful, that's going to be a different conversation, but he's going to try.
Codex on the Rise Up See Red podcast of SRF Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's move on and talk about the Cardinals' next pick, which came earlier than we expected because they traded up. We'll talk about Marco Wilson, the cornerback that they they are super high on, but not everyone is. That's going to next. Rise Up Sea Red. Back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals did not have a third or a fourth round pick, so day 2 came. They had their selection and where they picked more, and then after that, it was going to be a long wait for Cardinals fans and analysts and all of that when it came to Saturday, because you're going to have to wait the entire 4th round, half of the 5th round, and then, surprise! When you hit the end of the 4th round, the Cardinals traded up, and we're like, wait, what? The Cardinals traded up. I kind of like the deal. They did give up a 4th next year. So they gave up their 5th round pick to move up. They gave up a 4th rounder next year and got the 136th pick in the draft, which was a round 4 pick, and also picked up an extra 6th rounder, which, if you've paid attention to me on this show and on Twitter, I really lament. I don't love it when the Cardinals pick up the late day 3 picks, 7th round picks. They can go away because they make us analysts and bloggers and reporters. It extends our day significantly on Saturday. I know that's just, blogger problems, but that extra 6th round pick was actually it was a good thing. It was a good thing in this case. And while they're giving up a 4th next year, they're giving up a future day 3 pick. They go up and get a cornerback in Marco Wilson. And the reviews are really mixed. Keim and Kingsbury both call him the steal of their draft, which is an interesting thing for them to consider him the steal of the draft this year for their draft class. He's super athletic, comes with a history of some injuries, which is kind of an interesting thing that they're doing. And they traded up to get him. And there's others that aren't super high on him, and you look at the tape and you see some flaws in his game, don't you?
Yeah, you definitely see flaws, and one of the biggest flaws in his game right now is he's very he's a guy that needs to play forward, which what I mean by that is almost in like a cover 2 situation where he can play downhill and near the line of scrimmage. That's where he's best at. When you see him in man-to-man coverage, he's a guy that relies heavily on his athleticism. And by the way, I don't think we mentioned this yet. He is an elite athlete. 2 ACL tears in his career. One in 2000, I want to say 17. I mean, it's 16 or 17. He tore his ACL in high school. And then in 2019, I believe it was 2019, might have been 18, he tore his ACL at Florida. And so both knees, torn ACLs, and all he does is come out and put up one of the most freakish pro days that we've seen in a long time. He hit 26 reps on the bench, so he's incredibly strong, which, by the way, I think was more than Zaven Collins had. He ran a 4.37 40. He had a 44-inch vertical and a 136-inch broad jump. So all of those are 90th percentile or higher. The jumps are 99th percentile. That's how talented he is. The problem becomes he, as a cover man, was progressively worse from his initial freshman season in 2017 to his technically not senior season, but redshirt junior season because of injuries in 2020. In 2020, he gave up a passer rating of 117, which, if you don't know passer rating, basically anything over 75 is a negative. You don't want that. And he gave that up. 117 is not great. He's a guy that when the play is in front of him, he can make plays. When he is needing to turn and run with a guy, he just doesn't have the technique at this point in his development to do that. However, and we'll talk about this with another player. They're betting on freak athleticism to allow them to work with the guys and become better technicians at the position and grow as players. And athletes of Wilson's ilk are incredibly hard to find.
Well, and we do have to note, so physically, if you haven't noticed, you will probably know who Marco Wilson is without knowing who he is, because he is also that guy against LSU who took a dude's shoe and threw it 20 yards against LSU and essentially cost the Gators a win because the play extended the drive and they went down and kicked a game-winning field goal, and it basically knocked the Gators out of the college football playoff at that point. So we did find an interesting tidbit, and that would be this. Marco Wilson matches up athletically. He's similar to Robert Alford, who was a very athletic cornerback coming out of southeastern Louisiana when he came out, his teammate. So you've got an athletic profile like Robert Alford, and, Wilson now has the injury history that Robert Alford has, and the decision-making on tape that matches Drake Kirkpatrick from a year ago, which is interesting, because I will say this. I haven't heard them this excited about a cornerback since Brandon Williams. They did draft cornerback in Christian Campbell in 2018 in the 6th round. They kind of liked him. He didn't pan out. But they were so bullish on Brandon Williams. He had elite athleticism. And there's no doubting that. He had some athletic testing that had honestly had no rival. The problem was he played he didn't even have a full year of cornerback in terms of experience, and it became very evident that playing as cornerback was very, very, very rough. Wilson actually has played that way, but the way they talk about them, I think they think he might be able to start this year. And as it looks right now, there's a good chance of that, because the top three corners are Malcolm Butler, Byron Murphy, and Robert Alford, and it's not like you can expect you can't bank on Robert Alford being healthy. So we might be looking at a guy who could start. And I was telling you before the show, I think the Wilson pick is sort of the barometer on the Steve Keim scout, kind of the personnel department and how they view cornerbacks. Because I've heard of people, people believe that the pick is a steal. I've heard other people say he should have been drafted 2 rounds later. And so with that sort of mix, I think what you find is he will be kind of the defining factor about when it comes to Cardinals and scouting cornerback talent, because they haven't really, have they really developed a cornerback? I mean, they've got Byron Murphy, but historically, they've not been able to. They got Patrick Peterson, you got Byron Murphy, but there isn't really anyone that you can say has really done much in the league in the last decade of the cornerbacks that they've drafted, especially since Steve Keim took over.
Yeah, and so Wilson's going to be an interesting test case, because again, we're talking about an amazing athlete that's going to have to learn how to play the game, or they're going to have to change their defense. And I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing when you look at who they have in Byron Murphy, Malcolm Butler, and then you put a Wilson in there. Maybe they should play a little more zone coverages and things of that nature, and see about using that as their base coverage. But we'll see how that develops and things of that nature over the next couple of months, and see where they go with it, because It's going to be interesting to see if they are again relying on um, Robert Alford to be one of the main guys going into training camp.
Could they really do that? At least they're not paying him that much this year. Anyway.
Right, exactly.
Coming up next on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on to the 6th round where they had 2 players. We'll talk about Victor Dimukeje and Tay Gowan. 2 guys that are a little bit intriguing. That's coming next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals made 2 selections in the 6th round. The first, I will admit, I'd never heard of. I didn't follow as many things, but this is the one of all the picks I felt was the biggest head scratcher to me, considering when they went with Duke's second pass rusher guy. It wasn't Chris Rumpf, it was Victor Dimukeje, who, is kind of Marcus Golden like, but they left a guy in Quincy Roche from Miami who many felt should have been drafted much higher, and they passed on him to take another guy off the edge in Dimukeje. He's my biggest scratcher for me. I don't think it's a bad pick, but it is the pick that for me made the least amount of sense.
I think it's one of those picks where you look at it and you say, this is a kind of hedge on their part, whether it's Devon Kennard, Marcus Golden. I mean, we're kind of already assuming that Kennard won't be back after this year.
Honestly, we're surprised he's still on the roster.
And yeah, exactly. And so, what you get with Dimukeje is a very, what's the word I'm looking for? A very well-rounded backup pass rusher. What that means is you have a guy in Dimukeje who can give you 15 snaps and get 5 pressures on those 15 snaps. And that would be, a massive importance, especially when you have a guy like Dennis Gardeck, who you probably aren't going to see a whole lot from until, would you say, October?
I think he's going to, I don't think there's any chance he's playing at all till at least midseason.
And so Dimukeje, he actually profiles out similar to a former New England Patriot player, Tully Banta-Cain. And so I don't know how familiar.
I don't know who that is, so.
Well, and so that's not surprising. So, but the weird thing about Banta-Cain was that he was a career backup for them, a long time backup in New England. Drafted in 2003 and played with them from 2003 till 2010. He had a little stint in San Francisco as well. And he was a guy that went out and got, sacks as a backup player. In his 4th season with New England, he had 5.5 sacks. He went to San Francisco, had 3.5 sacks as a backup. Came back to New England in 2009 and had 10 sacks. And then his final year in 2010 had 5 sacks. So he's a guy that, had almost 28 sacks in his career as a pure backup. And that's kind of who Dimukeje profiles out to be like. And that is, if you're looking at it from that perspective, that is an invaluable asset to have on the team. A guy that can come in and just force pressure.
Well, you look at him, so he isn't as long, so he doesn't have the height. So
no, he's a very, like
Marcus
you said,
Golden, Hassan Reddick. I mean, the Cardinals have gotten success for those. So the one thing we know, if you're using him as a pass rusher, Vance Joseph can use you. Now, he's strong. That's one thing. He's very strong. He has a high motor.
And he has an advanced pass rush repertoire.
And so that makes him really intriguing, and especially Character-wise, he's going to offer upside on special teams. So at minimum, you see that he's potentially an upgrade over a guy like Kylie Fitz, who, when he was on the field, really didn't offer. Like, he's a guy on the field, but didn't really offer any upside. Special teams, he was fine. I think that's kind of the role you could see him developing into. And honestly, I don't get too upset about 6th and 7th round picks because they rarely do anything outside of 1 or 2 years. And so if he can make the roster and contribute on special teams, that especially as a rookie, hey, you're doing your job.
Well, and we've talked about it before, but they are what you and I like to call lottery tickets. They are taking a shot and seeing if it works out.
Now, their other 6th round pick is a guy that I think had Saturday's quote of the day, and that would be UCF's Tay Gowan. Fell to the 6th round, a guy who did, the COVID opt-out was rough on him. That being the COVID year that it was hard on him because he chose to opt out. He never had more than one. So he started out in Miami of Ohio. He went to a junior college for a year, then played 1 year at UCF in 2019 before he opted out of 2020, the season, because of COVID. And he had reasons to do it. He had a baby at home. And so not a lot of tape on him, but a guy who's very athletic as well. But you gotta root for the guy after he comes out in his introductory press. And this is just right after he's drafted and says, he's thanking the Cardinals for drafting him so late. He's thanking the situation. In terms of his approach, the mental approach, reminds me of Keyshawn Johnson, something that sort of, but did it more vocally. He even called himself, I feel I'm the Tom Brady of corners, obviously referring to the 6th round status Tom Brady, who's, the greatest quarterback of all time, probably. That sort of money quote is you love to hear. And honestly, I think he is the player. He's the day 3 pick that I think has the greatest upside. I don't know what's going to happen with him, but if there's anything else that you're going to take a risk on, you've got athleticism and you've got want to. And so you get that who has some pretty good tape, and then you bet on that on in the 6th round. That's exactly what you want to go for. And I think if there is a steal to be had, I don't know if it's Wilson. I think Gowan has the biggest potential to be the steal of this draft.
Yeah, Gowan was a guy I really liked coming out. I was surprised he didn't get more talk as a day 2 guy, but there are some, issues. One, he's a very lean athlete, 6'1", 185 pounds. He's got good size, but he's a very lean and linear guy. Like Jess said, one year of tape, that's tough. You go back and you watch him against a team like Stanford or Cincinnati, and he's got a really good game, but then you go watch him against a team like Temple or even like a Marshall, and you wonder if he's a draftable prospect. There are things that you like at his size. Again, at 6'1", he moves really well. He's just very smooth hipped, can turn and run with guys with ease. That's unusual for a taller corner at 6'1". He's a good athlete he's a 4'4" guy, 4'4" technically. That makes him, an above average, but he's not a complete,
he's not Marco Wilson.
Not a complete speed freak. That being said, he closes really well, and his short area work is what makes him unique as a player. There were some interesting, situations. He didn't get a Senior Bowl invite. I don't think he was invited to the combine either, even though there wasn't a combine. Um, and that's a little different than what you usually see for him or for prospects. We don't know what that means. We haven't heard anything off the field that would lead to that. And that typically, when they're not invited, that's what it is an off the field thing. But as a pure cover guy, he was far and away the best cornerback coming out of Florida that was drafted by the Arizona Cardinals.
Coming up next on the Rise of Sea Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's come back and talk about the Cardinals' 7th round picks. I know this is what you get on when it's an all Cardinals show. We even talk 7th round. That's coming up next on Rise of Sea Red. We're back on the Rise of Sea Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. We move on to the Cardinals' 2 7th round picks. They go with another defensive back at their first of 2 picks, which is James Wiggins out of Cincinnati, safety who's coming off who tore his ACL, missed the 2019 season, 2020. Did not look like the same player he was in 2018, but in 2018, he looked very, very good. He's a safety who's athletic. He will play on special teams in all phases, so he adds to that room. He's very interesting in the fact that their safety room is very intriguing now. They've got some competition because you've got 2 locks, would be Buddha and Jalen Thompson. And then you've got a bunch of guys, Deontay Thompson, their 5th round pick from a couple years ago. And then you've got James Wiggins, whom they just drafted. And then guys in Sean Williams, Chris Banjo, and Charles Washington who make their money on special teams right now. I think that's going to be an interesting competition, especially since, like as you'll note, Wiggins was a freak in 2018 playing for Cincinnati.
Yeah, when you go back and kind of watch the film of him, his 2018 was a really dynamic and unique season. So I'm going to get some kind of boring stuff right here, so just be prepared. In 2018, he lined up as a slot cornerback 456 snaps, a box safety 151 snaps, and then as a free safety 111 snaps. His ability as a cover guy in the slot was what made him so talented and unique, but he was also kind of a pseudo defunct edge outside linebacker type of guy there to play the run and help against the run. He was an incredible athlete coming downhill, a thumper, a guy that could just make plays and did so consistently. And then he blew the knee out, and you've got no 2019. And then he came back this year. Cincinnati was the best group of 5 program in the country. They went to, I believe, the Sugar Bowl and had a great showing in that game. In a close loss, I believe they had a close loss in that game. And you see what Wiggins did this year. One, he didn't play as much. 139 snaps in the slot, 179 in the box, and 158 at free. They had to kind of move him away from making those quick plays out of the slot because he just couldn't physically do it anymore. His transitions, his play was incredibly reminiscent of what we saw from Tyrann Mathieu when he was coming off of his second tear in 2016, where, remember, people were frantically questioning Steve Keim paying him. I mean, you remember that vividly. Like, what were they thinking? Blah, blah, blah. So I think that's my biggest hope for Wiggins, is that he was coming off an ACL. He didn't look right physically. He was slower. I mean, he played hesitant, and he played. I don't want to say scared because that's disrespectful, but he didn't play with the same ferocity that he did in 2018. But then you look at his workout numbers, much like Marco Wilson with the 2 ACL tears. 4 40-yard dash, 38-inch vertical, 127-inch broad. At 5'11", 209 pounds, he's incredibly well put together. And then he's an explosive straight line athlete. And you look at his overall game, and this is something I wanted to bring up. The Cardinals decided that they were willing to take chances on injured players that played the year after the injury, as opposed to players that had to either opt out or miss 2020 because of injury. And that makes sense because there's no medical checks, right? Like there were certain medical checks, but there weren't the normal medical checks. So instead, they went with guys that were back on the field at least in 2020, not guys that either got hurt in 2020 or weren't able to play in 2020.
And then the last pick that they made would be another one that it was kind of like, well, why? But it's a late 7th round pick. I'm not going to complain that much, but they pick up a center, a Penn State center, Michael Manette. They love to take day 3 draft picks. For me, the only question is, of all the day 3, 7th round draft picks that you could do, center is the biggest head scratcher because it looks like he's going to have a really hard time to make this roster between having Rodney Hudson on the roster, Lamont Gilliard, Max Garcia. It's going to be hard for a late 7th round pick to crack this roster with the players ahead of him that they have. That said, they had NFL.com, Latin Zierlein had him going in the 4th round, so there's some upside there. He's the type of guy that they like to draft. It's betting on character, it's betting on toughness, and the Cardinals had some success with another Penn State center and A.Q. Shipley for a lot of years, so why not? Honestly, especially the late 7th rounder in a draft that you don't know just exactly how deep it is, why not get an offensive lineman like that?
Yeah, and Manette is an interesting guy. He is a leader. Smart guy. Not a great athlete in terms of on field. Was injured and unable to work out at his pro day, so maybe he's a better athlete, but he never played like it. He'll be 24 this year, so he's older, but he worked at different spots. For Penn State, in the sense that he's worked with veterans, he's worked with new guys. So he's got experience and versatility in that way over his 3 years. And he's intelligent in his blitz pickups, and I don't know if physically he can compete consistently at the NFL level against guys that are going to be a little stronger and a little faster.
And at the conclusion of the draft, that's been interesting because the Cardinals have yet to announce their undrafted rookie class. All that we've come across are 4 players. This would make the smallest undrafted rookie class in my memory of covering the team in the last decade. And I think I know why. One, their roster is full. They had before the draft 78 players. It was 79, but 78 once Marcus Gilbert announced his retirement. He's been moved to the reserve retire list. 78 players, which means 7 draft picks takes them to 85, which means they only have 5 spots on the 90-man roster. So 4 players, they haven't been announced yet. There's a couple of tight ends. There's a defensive tackle. And then I don't remember who the other player is off the top of my head.
Lorenzo Burns, the cornerback from
out of Arizona.
U of A.
That's right. So they've got a defensive back, a couple of tight ends, and a defensive tackle. It's interesting because I recall it's something the Cardinals really haven't done in the past. So they did their futures contracts, the young players, the practice squatters, the guys that weren't on an NFL contract back in January. And then they signed a bunch of guys at the beginning of April. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I think this was the Cardinals' way of saying, hey, this year was really tough on scouting. We don't have nearly the information on the players. Therefore, we're not as confident in the talent in this class. So let's fill our off-season roster with guys who have been trying to get in teams the last couple of years, and we have scouted and have reports on, so we can get them to camp instead. This is going to be the smallest undrafted rookie class we've ever seen. And then of course they added. And that's where the other guys. But I did get a roster exception for that. So they added the Austrian tight end as part of the international program, and so that will fill their 90-man roster because they added 3 tight ends and a defensive tackle and a cornerback. More's probably coming, but I don't think that we're probably going to see a whole lot from this undrafted rookie class. Although the one name I think to watch is Kerry Angeline, being that he's the one where they probably threw the most money at, giving him $30,000 of their $160,000 that they can give out players, undrafted rookies, at the tight end position. I don't know much about him, but that'd be the player
I would
to watch.
say from that perspective, he's kind of he might be their kind of Arnold-looking replacement. 6'7", 245. He is not a great athlete for his size. Did not test well. 4.8, 440 yard dash. 12 reps on the bench. A 29-inch vertical. Like, just not a good athlete. But he's massive. 6'7", 245, 10-inch hands. Decent arm length. A guy that can go up and get the ball, and that's what he does well. I just don't know if he can do anything besides go up and get the ball. Like, he's just not athletic enough. But it'll be interesting to see. He's not a blocking tight end despite his size. I mean, there's really not much to say about him. He's not.
And honestly, he's an undrafted rookie on a roster that we kind of already know what the depth chart is going to look like, and we think that the Cardinals are going to be adding a veteran tight end here in the next little while anyway. So with that, let us end this edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk of the web, episode 306. We will probably take a week or two off, depending on, because we don't really have any news going on right now. If something comes up, we will be back, but we'll probably take at least a week off before we can start talking about OTAs and the other office stuff. So that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. We just finished talking draft. Thanks for listening as always, and go Cardinals. Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up Sea Red.